Welcome back. We've got a special show prepared just for you today. This episode will feature not one, not two, but 3 board game connoisseurs who also just so happen to be dentists. That's right, Kyle is joining me again along with a special guest, Jacob Gowans, to discuss the ever-burning question of how to find games and gamers to game with. We'll be sharing our best strategies for growing a game collection, culling a game collection, finding and making friends with hobbyist gamers, and growing the hobby by bringing in newcomers. After that, we'll talk about steaming hot games that we've been playing and purchasing recently. My name is Nick Murray, and this is the Bitewing Games Podcast. So, today we are joined by not only Kyle, but also a new guest to the Bitewing Games podcast, Jacob Gowans. Jacob actually reached out to us a little while back because he also happens to be a dentist and a gamer in this hobby of ours. And, we're not a dentist exclusive podcast, and it's probably starting to sound like it is because that's the only people who've been talking on the show thus far. And we actually have some plans to change that in the near future. But we thought, hey, why not bring another fellow dentist onto the podcast? Not to talk about dentistry. Well, maybe a tiny bit. I mean, it's hard not to throw 3 dentists together and keep them from speaking teeth. But to talk about board games. So, Jacob, you brought up some interesting topics that we want to talk about today as far as growing the hobby, both within your collection and within your social group. And so we want to get into that. But before we do, why don't you share with us how you found your way into the board game hobby?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So when I was in dental school, I had this guy I went to church with, and he would always bug me. Hey man, you want to come over and play like Star Trek, the Star Trek card game I got? And I was like, I'm not really into Star Trek. Thank you though. Maybe something else, maybe some other time. And 4 years were going by, and finally during my senior year, this guy comes up. He's like, hey man, I got this brand new board game. It's like a dungeon crawler game, and it's really cool, really fun. You got to come over and try it. And I was like, I don't know, man. I'm gonna be leaving this area soon. Maybe you should find something. He kept begging me, please come over and play this game. I was like, all right, let's play this game. So the game that he wanted to teach me was called Descent, the first edition of Descent. And I played it with him. We probably were in there in his basement playing it for 5 hours. And I was blown away by how awesome that game was. And as soon as I graduated from dental school, I went out and bought a copy for myself and showed it to my buddy who was kind of into board games. And he was like, and I just kind of took off from there. He introduced my friend introduced me to Board Game Geek and all these different types of games that are out there. And for me, it just kind of, once I started actually getting paychecks, I started to afford to buy board games, and it just went crazy from there.
Yeah. It seems like as a student, it's tough to fully embrace the hobby. I know, probably Kyle knows this, that I was able to fund some of my, over the top board game purchases with specifically with football tickets from the Ohio State football games. So you can get those tickets pretty cheap, and they are, top dollar for people who want to buy resold tickets. That's what helped fuel mine. But Descent, they kind of threw you right into the deep end there.
Yeah, it's a beast of a game. It, an average session takes at least 3, maybe 4 hours.
Dang.
That's crazy. Yeah, when I introduce people, I always start with a nice Ticket to Ride or Splendor or something. This is 30, 45 minutes. That's all you're putting in. It's about trains or jewels, nothing crazy, but they jumped right into a dungeon crawler.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, glad it worked out. Yeah. So I imagine for all of us who have, gotten a little too deep into this hobby, but really enjoyed every minute of it. Our collections have grown over time, and we've kind of learned our personal tastes and preferences. I talk about that quite a bit on the podcast. But for you guys, what do you use to help grow your collection, specifically to find your favorite games? Because it's there's hundreds and hundreds coming out, thousands every year, and it's so easy for publishers and designers to jump into the market these days and put out their own design, and the barriers of entry are just keep seeming to come down with each year. So how do you find your favorite games to add to your collection?
I think it's a hard thing. There's a lot of so many resources out there, and only so much time in a day that I can spend on my phone looking at board games before my wife tells me I have a problem. And so there are a lot of resources. I do podcasts a lot. I'll listen to a few different podcasts that they talk about board games, and they talk about their top 10 games, and that for me is really helpful. I start to see trends of what games people like, and I like the same games, and so that's a good way. I also always enjoy Kickstarter. I love to support, especially like first time creators that, hey, they're trying to put out a game or they've created this awesome game they spent the last 5 years designing. I love to go read through and watch some videos about games that people have created. And I feel like I'm supporting people, but really that's just my way of convincing myself and my wife that it's okay for me to spend more money on another game.
Yeah, there's some definitely great ways to find stuff. How about you, Jacob?
I'm a firm believer that the cream rises to the crop. So a lot of times, I frequent the subreddit called Board Games. In fact, I think that's where I might have heard about your podcast first, was there.
Nice.
I also pay a close attention to the movement in the Board Game Geek top 100 list. In fact, there's a guy who every month on the first or the second of the month, he usually publishes a list and shows like what games have dropped out of the top 50, what games have entered the top 50, how many people are like voting for them and playing them and stuff like that. And Board Game Geek also does a good job of like kind of tracking this thing called the hotness, which talks about like the board games whose forums are the most active at that time. And so there's a lot of big games will tend to generate a lot of hype. And so it's a careful balance between like investigating but not getting sucked into the hype, especially if it's a Kickstarter that has a ton of miniatures. We're going to drop like $300. I mean, I've done it before. I've dropped like hundreds of dollars on a Kickstarter campaign, only to find out that it probably wasn't worth the investment. But I also follow every Sunday morning on the subreddit for board games. These two different guys publish upcoming Kickstarters and the Kickstarter roundup, which talks about all the games that are coming out that week or that are in their first week and then that are leaving that week. And so I'll keep tabs on that to kind of see like what catches my eye. But after 10 years of board gaming, I've kind of gotten a pretty good idea of like what I'm going to play and what's not going to get played. And a lot of that just takes time. Like if you're new to the hobby, you don't really know what you like yet. And so you do have to kind of go out and try new games, whether it's buying them or a friend who has a bunch of board games and finding out what you like and don't like.
Yeah, I'm a frequent lurker of the Reddit Board Games page as well as Board Game Geek. And they've been super helpful resources. The communities there are fantastic. They have a daily recommendation post on Reddit where you can just go in and say, hey, I'm looking for this kind of game. What do you guys recommend? And they always have great recommendations. Sometimes I'll, when I'm bored, I'll throw down a few recommendations for people and hope they find something that they like there as well. So one thing I really have found helpful for me personally on Board Game Geek is what's called the Geek Buddy tool. Now, if you pull up any game page on Board Game Geek, it has the title at the top and then a short description of it right below. And then right below that, it has 3 links: the ratings, the comments, and the Geek Buddy analysis. And so the Geek Buddy analysis is nice because I can click that and it will show me specific people who I've added as a Geek Buddy, their ratings and their comments on that particular game. And so if I find somebody on Board Game Geek, or I have a friend who is a regular and they keep, I guess, their records up to date on the games they're playing and how they like them, then I can click this button and instantly see like, okay, how does everybody that I'm kind of familiar with feel about this particular game? And then that kind of informs me how likely I am to enjoy it too. For example, I have like Tom Vassell on there. I have Quentin Smith from Shut Up and Sit Down. A lot of podcasters that I follow, as well as some friends that I've I've made gaming along the way who also keep regular Board Game Geek accounts. So that's been very helpful for me, and like what you guys have said, following regular updates, whether it's from content creators or others. And honestly, my favorite publishers and designers, I'm always keeping tabs on them. So it's hard not to support what they put out next, especially if they feel like they're on a roll as far as like me enjoying everything they put out. So cool. Well, we've all gotten pretty good at finding games that we enjoy and clicking the purchase button and hopefully getting them to the table. But on the other side of that, it can be easy to kind of go too far or to have more games than you're able to play and keep on top of. And also, as you play more and more games and as you play the same games multiple times, you find that your tastes and preferences change, or they grow, or they evolve. And so over time, you end up with a lot of games that maybe are not getting played as much. And so then there comes this idea of culling your collection. And so what are you guys' thoughts on that? And how do you feel that has helped you in this hobby?
I think it is I really enjoy the board game hobby and community, and there's a lot of things I love. One thing I almost struggle with a little bit is I feel like people have this idea of board games being trophies. Like, look at this giant wall or room I have full of board games and all of them that I've collected, and everyone, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And I think it's good. Like, I think that's cool. But I really have always enjoyed playing board games. And so I don't feel attached to a board game in the sense of like, hey, look how many I've collected. More like, am I getting them to the table? Am I playing them? Am I experiencing the games? And with that, like you said, is I get a new game and all of a sudden I'm like, I haven't played this other game for a while. And I start to wonder, do I even want to play this game? And some of them are almost for like nostalgic purposes. I have a hard time getting rid of. I'm like, but this was my first, like, this is one of my first games that got me into it. Should I get rid of it even though I never play it? Do I just hang it up on the wall like a piece of art? But that being said, I have found that my preferences change, and I've started viewing it more, even if I buy a game, I play it 4 or 5 times, like, it was fun, but it's not one I want to keep playing. I'll sell it for $10 cheaper than I bought it. And to me, I'm like, I've essentially paid $10 to rent this game and get a few really good experiences. And then I pass it on to someone else that will enjoy it and appreciate it, rather than filling up my shelf and feeling this sense of shame that I'm not getting all of my games played. Be like, no, like I played this game how I wanted to. I feel satisfied. Let's move on to the next game. And for me, that's been a good thing to realize. Like, I'm not giving up on a game. I'm not saying it's a bad game. I'm just like, no, like, I got my fill and I feel okay about that. I'm ready to move on to something else.
Totally. The rental mentality has really helped me as well, especially when I get so pumped about a new game and I'm just like, I really got to try this at least, and it's like right up my wheelhouse. And you know, it's going on Kickstarter, and if it's a publisher that doesn't go direct to retail after, then there is that FOMO that creeps in. But I think it helps when I look at all the games I pre-ordered and stuff to know, like, okay, a lot of these games I'm churning out word as well, and like you say, you're paying $10 to rent it and it doesn't feel as bad on the wallet or the heart.
Yeah.
That's the tough thing about Kickstarter, is that you'll order a game and sometimes you don't get it for a year, sometimes 2 years. I've had games that take 2 years to arrive. By the time it arrives, like, kind of like, what was I so excited about this game for? And sometimes, like I talked about, when you go all in on a game and you get 2-3 boxes worth of stuff, it's almost overwhelming. Like, you're just like, oh my goodness, like, what am I going to do with all this? And one of the biggest reasons why I've at times decided to start cutting down on my collection is just because I don't have space. Like, board games, it's not like a DVD collection where you can have 300 DVDs and put them in a little case and have them there. I mean, who has DVDs anymore? But like,
we understand what you mean.
But like, 300 board games takes up a room. It's an entire room of your house. And if you're buying games like Kingdom Death Monster or Gloomhaven, that's like those games are the size of like 4 or 5 board games. And so I'll see these people who post pictures of their collections, and they don't have room for all their games. They're finding nooks and crannies all around their house to stuff them in, and
got those little towers.
Yeah. And I just I've kind of reached the point where I'm fortunate enough to have a room in my house that is my game room. And if I start noticing that my shelf space is shrinking, then I start selling games. And sometimes, yeah, you have to just kind of reach that mentality where you're like, you know what, like I get what I can for this game, and let someone else enjoy it. And sometimes you get lucky and it's a game that's out of print because maybe Shut Up Sit Down was talking about it recently, and you're like, now you're selling it for 2 or 3 times what it's worth because no one else has a copy, but everybody else wants it. That can happen sometimes. It's kind of nice, but typically, yeah, my biggest concern is space. And then and I'll have games that has sat on my shelf for 18 months, 2 years even, and I haven't played it, and I'm just like, maybe it's just time to let this one go and just give up on it.
Yeah, that's, I think, just finding tricks and ways to, I guess, guilt trip yourself in some ways into, culling down your collection can really help for you with space. And for me, it's getting to be space as well. But I wrote a blog post several months ago about FOMO, or fear of neglecting your own, and kind of using that to combat FOMO. And what helps me is, again, Board Game Geek. I don't know, in some ways it's a double-edged sword because it makes me buy more games as well. But I log games that I own, and when I play them, and when I see like, oh, this game I got months ago, I haven't played it in months, and I've only played it 2 times. So then I feel, kind of this personal pressure that I put on myself to either get it played again and, make it part of the regular rotation, or maybe it's a game that I'm not really, motivated to play, or like if I try to push myself to do it, I'm reluctant. And then I realize, okay, this really isn't a game that belongs in my collection. And so I can, sell or trade it for a game that I am more excited to play, and kind of keep the collection limited, but active. And so that's kind of helped me as well.
I thought that as your partner in crime here on the Bitewing Games, I feel a little bit like self-advertising, but I really thought that blog post for me, I was like, oh yeah, like I think when you think about it in this way of like, hey, look at all these opportunities, these new games. But I almost think of it like my children, and I know that's dramatic, and I'm not a crazy board gamer like that, but this idea of like, hey, like you have these board games, and like rather than like, oh, I need to buy this new one, like no, like you have your own board games that like you love, and like give attention to the games that you love, and don't neglect them. So I thought that was a real interesting thing.
Yeah,
The other thing that sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it's kind of weird, just like documenting your board game collection, kind of like a library, and curating it. It does kind of generate like those reminders of like, oh, I love this game. Like Jaipur is a game that like I don't think like tonight is the night, Saturday night we're doing Jaipur, you when you're planning out a game days or weeks in advance, it's like the big event game, right? But and so you forget about little games like that. But then when you see it again, or when you're looking at it and you're like, oh, I haven't played this in forever, whether it's on a list or on your shelf, and it's like, yeah, we do need to play this again because I love this one and I don't want this to leave my collection. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking with, as we talk about the collections and we talk about gaining games, and I'm sure some people will be like, oh, if I was a dentist and I had unlimited money, I wish I was in that spot. I wish as a dentist it was that way. I think everyone's in that spot where they want a little more money to buy a bigger collection, things like that. But aside from space being a limiting factor, I do think time to play the games, but also the money to buy the games is a big limiting factor for everyone. And I just think there's other resources. One thing I even just thought of, I was like, oh yeah, my board game store here in town, you can go there and you can just play board games. They have a whole wall of games that you can either rent for like $7 for a week, or you can just sit down and play them in the store. So I think there's a lot of options like that. If you're like, I'm just not in a place financially where I can't buy all these games, I can't test all these different games. Lots of game stores, lots of friends, like you can find communities no matter where you are, and just say, hey, I'd love to try a game. Does anyone have this game I could borrow, or know of a place that you can like rent or try games? Lots of great resources there if space isn't your only limit, but also time, or also money.
Yeah, especially the digital medium has been helped out a bit, I think, by all the COVID stuff. But Tabletop Simulator and Tabletopia, a lot of people have kind of moved over there temporarily. I think all of us prefer to play games in real life, but that's a good way to try out games, at least. Try before you buy approach. So nice. Well, yeah, I think those are all some great tricks for finding games that you love, growing your collection, but also culling your collection. But a collection is only as good as the opportunities you have to get it to the table. And at least in an ideal world, that's what we all want to do with our games, right? And so I guess in normal times and this past year as well. How have you guys, found hobbyist gamers or people who share your similar tastes in games so that you can actually play the games that you love on your shelf and get them to the table?
I think it's been a little bit different for everyone with COVID, and in some ways I'm tired of hearing like, oh, once COVID's over and before COVID, but I have the luxury that I have a wife who really enjoys playing board games with me, and I have a brother right now that's living with me, and he enjoys board games. So we can usually get a really good 3-player game going quite often with the people that I'm living with. But I know not everyone has that. Not everyone's spouse or partner, or maybe they live alone and they don't love to do that. There's always options of great solo games. But I do think there's a lot of good ways to find people that are interested. Again, lots of Facebook, Reddit, lots of different places that you can find communities of people locally that enjoy board games, and maybe they already have a local meetup, or maybe you can create a local meetup. I think for me, that's one way I found is just through social media. You can find people to play with.
Yeah, so you mentioned there's an app called Meetup, and you can, I guess, access it on the computer. I have it on my phone, but I found, I think it's more commonly used in more populated areas, but the Meetup app has typically some good board game groups that meet monthly or bi-monthly or weekly, and so that's a good way to find people. I really got into the board game hobby when we lived in Columbus, and so we really didn't know a whole lot of people. I didn't grow up there. We just went there for dental school, and still found tons of people to game with. And even after that, moving up to Akron, that area, I would cast a wide net on Facebook pages like the Columbus, Ohio board game group. I forget what it's called, and the Greater Akron board game group on Facebook. And then I'd say, hey guys, here are some of my absolute favorite games, and these are ones that I love to play on a regular basis. If anyone is interested, I'd love to get together and have game nights. And that was a great way to find the exact people who love the games that I like. I threw down like Pax Pamir as an example, and Roots, and Brass Birmingham and other examples, some of my top games. And I found the exact people where we love to play all the same games. And so it's very easy for us to get a regular game night going that way. But what about you, Jacob? What has worked for you?
Yeah, so I've since I graduated from dental school, I've lived in like 5 different places, and everywhere I've gone, I've started a game group. And it's kind of nice being the host, but it's also kind of like you're kind of expected to be the one that typically buys the games or has the games.
Yeah, true.
Which can be, I'm fortunate that I'm, in a position where I can, afford to buy games when I want to. Not that I have like unlimited money, but not one of those dentists. But anyways, I've gone through church and through social media, both. And a lot of times what I found at least is that the people who come will often help you branch out through their friends and family. And the nice thing about that is that it can be really hard for someone to just come over to some stranger's house for a board game night. I've seen it happen in my own groups, but where like someone comes who has literally no ties to anybody except through meeting on social media. But it's and those connections tend to be a little more tenuous, whereas people who come because like their brother-in-law comes, or because their cousin or their work buddy, those tend to be more lasting people. And one of the things that like you always want, at least that I always want in a game group, is people who are consistent. Like it's tough to be in a game group where you're wondering, oh man, I don't know how many people we're going to have this week. Sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 8. And it's hard to even like predict or have a game ready to play when you have no idea on a week-to-week basis how many people you're going to have. And so it's definitely nice to have like we know exactly how many people will be here, and you can kind of it helps you get like legacy games played, where if you want to be playing stuff like Pandemic Legacy, King's Dilemma, Gloomhaven, you can have that consistency. But the nice thing about having a more fluid group is that you can play a whole different type, a whole range of games. Like we've done, and I currently run 2 groups, and on my Tuesday night group, we can sometimes have 8, 9, 10 people. And so we're playing games like Avalon, Escape the Aliens from Outer Space, Tortuga, all kinds of party games that have a little more strategy, and that Captain Sonar. So it does help you get a little more variety in what you do every week.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to keep mental tabs on the people that like to game regularly as far as what days they're available, and then pick games that are in their wheelhouse, and also like be like, okay, what second game would you guys want to play this night? We have this one planned, and kind of work from there, and usually work by a week to week basis of like, okay, what do you guys want to play this Wednesday? And we'll at least play this one if we get enough people, and then whatever else you guys are in the mood for, and that seems to work really well as far as getting a regular hobbyist gaming group going. It also just helps to go where the gamers congregate, whether that's the meetup locations or just a board game store. And if you go into a brick and mortar store and ask them like, okay, do you guys have regular like non-Magic the Gathering? That seems to be like their go-to, which is cool, but it's not really my thing, and I'm looking to play just your regular designer board game. And they usually, and hopefully this will pick up more, will have like certain nights where it's just kind of play anything, or when they say like a lot of people tend to come in, you can meet people that way just by sitting down with a random table and trying out a new game and making friends that way. So but something that's maybe even harder to do is you mentioned like finding people at church or in the workplace, or is maybe relatives or friends who aren't necessarily hobby gamers, but they do enjoy the occasional Catan or card game or Ticket to Ride or things like that. So how have you guys, I guess, helped the hobby to grow, or what do you find works as far as getting people more into board gaming if they're interested, and kind of introducing them to the greater world of all the games out there?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's just kind of leading people by the hand, starting with simple games like those ones that you mentioned, and then, hey, if you like this, let's try this. This is like that, but with a spin on it. Or this is, helping people kind of find things that are games that are based around intellectual properties that they're interested in. Some people be, if you've got like, hey, you like Batman? Well, guess what? There's this really, really complicated Batman game that I can sit down with you for an hour and teach you.
Nice. Yeah. I have found like I'll ask people like, hey, do you like playing board games? It'll just be somebody that I've never met before until just seeing them at church, or they've moved into the area, or making friends with somebody at work and being like, what kind of games do you like? Do you play any card games or board games? And whatever they mention, I'm lucky enough at this point to have a similar weight game in my collection, or one that I realize like, oh, if you like that kind of game, like you mentioned, then this one is right up your alley. And then you can kind of test the waters from there. I think maybe all of us at one point or another have been burned by throwing somebody into the deep end who wasn't quite ready for it. I mean, in your case, it worked out with Descent, but if I try to throw a really heavy strategy game at somebody who's used to, just a very simple, straightforward game with a quick rules teach, and they get exhausted when I'm still explaining the game 20 minutes into the game night, then it kind of helps to have a good range of games for every type of gamer, and to understand based on people's personalities and preferences, what they might enjoy, so you don't, I guess, scare them off.
Yeah, I agree with lots of that. And I think just listening to people, I feel like I'm trying to like convert people to the world of board games in some ways. But yeah, when I talk to people, and I just had someone the other day, they were telling me, they're like, oh, I love board games. And I was like, what kind of games? Like, we played Pit on New Year's Eve for 6 hours. And they literally, like, this wasn't a joke. This was like 6 hours. Like, we almost missed the ball drop. And I'm like, I think I would go crazy playing Pit for 6 hours. And I love games. Not always games like that for 6 hours. But anyway, just listening to them. And after she said that, I asked a few games if she tried one or two games. And actually pitched her on our game that's coming out, Social Grooming, later this year. I said, oh, hey, you should try out this game when we create it. She said, oh, that sounds awesome. But I think just listening to the games they like, and like Nick said, is just paying attention to what they like and knowing a few other games. And there's a million different YouTube videos and blog posts about introductory games, gateway games to get people into it. So lots of resources there.
Yeah, did we came up with one, or maybe
Yeah, we
recently?
have a list of games that are great for families and like introductory gateway games.
That's right. Our top 10 family games. We did a podcast on that. They all start to blur together after weeks and weeks of making these, but yeah, you can check that out. We definitely picked our favorite 10 family games that we put through the ringer over time.
Yep.
So yeah, stuff like that is definitely helpful for, and the nice thing about family games is even if somebody is ready for the hardcore games, if you find a good family game, it's hard to hate, something simple when it's so engaging and fun. So
Yep, that's kind of what I was thinking. That is, there are some great games that are, hey, this is a legacy game. It's going to take a few weeks to play, or hey, let's sit down for a 2-3 hour game. But I still love playing lots of these 30-40 minute games, and I think there's a ton of fun, lots of good strategy that you can do quickly. You can get people of varying skill or interest levels involved, and I think that's a lot of fun, is being able to bridge that gap between people who are really into games and people who aren't, and find a good mediocre, not mediocre, a good medium weight game that everyone can play.
very cool. Do you guys have any recent examples, or I guess any that come to mind where you got somebody who was maybe a casual gamer deep into it, and kind of how they their journey into the board gaming hobby?
My since I live near my sister and my brother-in-law, we played games every Sunday night, and most of the games that they are used to are simple games or like party games, like headbands and pie in the face, stuff like that. Just silly games. And so I tried, hey, let's do Sunday night games every night after dinner. And so we started doing this. And the first game I brought was like a little too advanced for them. And as I was explaining, I was like, I don't think this is going to work, And so like we kind of backed up and we went to things like Reef or Sagrada, Azul, and now we're playing The Crew, which is a trick-taking game for 4 players, and that's been pretty fun. I mean, we're not down into like Terra Mystica or anything like that right now, but like it's getting them used to the strategy that they weren't used to before, and we kind of mix it up with cooperative and competitive games and stuff like that, and make it more fun for everybody. And now that we've been doing that, you can kind of see that how they're getting better at identifying strategies that without having them pointed out and stuff like that.
Totally. Yeah, there's one thing that you have to remind yourself, is that you can't really force anybody into becoming a hobbyist gamer. You can't force a type of game onto somebody if it's not their jam, and you can't force a group to play a board game on a particular gathering. But it doesn't hurt to be prepared and to have something available for people, and have it offered up as an option. But yeah, it's been fun to see. We've in Columbus, we made lots of friends in our neighborhood. Lots of people were going to professional school or graduate school, those kinds of things. And so there were lots of couples in the same situation as us. And so we got a ton of people over to our house, or we went to their house before we had kids, and into gaming. And we would introduce them to stuff like Horrified, kind of a pandemic like game, or you mentioned it, Tortuga from Facade Games. And these are simple games to teach. And then we would find out later that this guy, Nate's wife, bought him those games for his birthday or for Christmas because he liked them so much. And so it's always cool to hear, and those aren't necessarily like my all-time top 10 games kind of things, but I always love to break them out for people. And it's cool to hear, like, when we do figure out a game that fits somebody's personality well, and can share that with them, how they draw joy from it, and then they start playing it with their friends and family. And it's cool to see that domino effect.
I think just that experience, like, because I love board games. I love the experience. I love the mental challenge of board games and the interaction you have with players. But honestly, that I taught some of my neighbors the game QE a few months. This is probably a year ago now. And they end like as soon as we were done playing the game, they said, "Where do we like? Can you buy that on Amazon? Like, we want that for Christmas." And like honestly, like that was one of my most fun board gaming experiences I can think of for a while. I loved the game and like the experience was good, but to see like the excitement and light in their eyes, I'm like, this is so fun. And like that's better than any mental challenge I get in a board game, just that experience of seeing them light up and their excitement. So I think that's something to really take into account too, is you're not just, hey, I just want to play a board game that I love, but like play a board game that people are going to love and that they'll feel excitement about, because that's what it's all about, I think.
Yeah, I've found that like a lot of times my favorite games are not the ones that I play the most often. It's the most fun games, that maybe they're not brain burners, but I'm getting to the table far more often than I get Twilight Struggle or Descent to the table. Games, that maybe every game isn't the most memorable experience, but they're kind of the tried and true. That almost anyone who plays it's going to have a good time, and they're going to be able to have an enjoyable and competitive experience versus they're going to be staring at the board wondering like what on earth, like what's going on.
Yeah.
Because my dad raised me with Risk and Monopoly and Clue and Pit and in fact I think the most wacky game that we had growing up was Omega Virus. And so we played very traditional games and my dad would always win. And now that I've become a hobbyist board gamer, when my dad comes to town to visit and he'll join me for board game night, by the end of the game, he still looks at me, he's like, I have no idea what's going on. And it's just a whole different kind of mentality to have if you're playing a game with any like, medium or heavy weights. It's if people aren't used to playing that, and it's almost kind of like a knack that you get where you learn how to pick up rules easier because you can kind of link it to I played a game with that kind of mechanic, or I played a game with that kind of a mechanic, and you start to be able to combine those types of things and understand rules being explained to you pretty quickly. But if you're not that type of board gamer, it does take time for your brain to learn how to think that way.
Yeah, the other hard thing is people learn in different ways. Some are very visual or example oriented learners. Others just want the procedure, step by step explanation. And I imagine all of us, when we explain games, we explain it in the same way to everybody. And so you'll definitely get some people who, they would have benefited more from me explaining it in a different way. And so, yeah, there's definitely some patience involved with the whole process. And ultimately, like you guys have shared, the goal is for everybody to have an enjoyable time and hopefully want to have even more board game nights. And I think it's important to keep in mind that you are not the only one with a collection that you're dying to play, but that everybody has their own tastes and preferences. And if you keep tabs on those things and make sure that you're getting games to the table that really hit the sweet spot for them as well, that there's ultimately a little bit of give and take from one session to another, that everybody will be get more out of it in the end. So we've talked a lot about playing board games and buying board games and getting rid of games and finding gamers to game with, but we haven't talked very much about games themselves. And I actually wanted to see if you don't have anything else to share about that particular topic, what games you've been enjoying recently, or some that you're excited about coming up soon. So I'm kind of springing this on you. So I'll share one that I played recently. It's The Search for Planet X, and I still don't have a copy of this, but I was able to learn it with my gaming group, who one of them does own a copy. And it was freaking sweet. I think you would really like this one, Kyle, for sure, because you're a big fan of Cryptid. And this is right in the same wheelhouse. It's very easy to teach and to play. And it's not going to convert anybody who doesn't like the thinky, puzzly deduction games. But it's super cool how it uses the app. Everybody can whip out their phone, and there's no chance of somebody derailing the whole game if they accidentally give the wrong answer, because all the answers come from the app themselves. But then you're using the central board that spins around, and you're putting theories out. Like, for those of you who played Cryptid or Clue, if you think like, oh, I think the candlestick was the weapon of choice in Clue, or in Cryptid, you're like, oh, I think it's definitely in the forest. Well, usually you keep that information to yourself until the end, but in the Search for Planet X, you actually publish those as theories, which remain secret for multiple more rounds. And people know you've put a theory on that section and you have a hunch of what is in there. And if you're correct when it is revealed, then you get points. And if you're wrong, then you get penalized. And so there's this incentive to kind of jump the gun sometimes when you're deducing like, okay, what is in this sector? Is it a gas cloud or is it nothing? I've boiled it down to these two options. I don't know for sure, but I'm going to guess it's a gas cloud because I want to get those extra points to win the game. And so I was super impressed with that. For anyone who enjoys deduction games, I think this is probably one of the best out there, just based on my one play of it. And so I'm hungry to get my own copy, speaking of growing a collection. So I think my wife will really enjoy it, Cammie, and I think we'll get some more good plays out of it.
Yeah, I've heard someone mention it, but I would love to try that one.
Do you think it's better than Cryptid?
I think it has more replayability to it than Cryptid. I think it has less it's less prone to like I said, mistakes or being derailed. They're both different enough that I wouldn't necessarily immediately be like, okay, Search for Planet X is in and Cryptid's out, see you later. But yeah, I think they do scratch a similar itch, and I think Search for Planet X probably does it better because it also has an advanced side to the board, and it has different skill levels that you can play at according to your individual level. So with Cryptid, it's like you can either be like, we're going to play the regular way, or we're going to play the way that melts everybody's brains, and it's all or nothing for everyone. With Search for Planet X, you can start out with less clues than your neighbor because you played the games more times than them. And so it kind of balances it out that way. And I obviously haven't, I've only played the game one time. It was on the beginner mode, but it seems like there's a lot of depth there. And I don't know, it's just fun the way there's this wheel that spins around on the board, and you're limited to guessing in those particular sectors. And then the way that, most deduction games are like, at the very end, you make your guess, and then one person wins and everybody else loses. But in the Search for Planet X, you can be the one who discovers Planet X, which is the ultimate goal, and get the most points for that. But you might still lose the game because other people were hot on the tails of where Planet X was, but they were also putting out better theories than you and more theories, guessing what each other sector had, and they can end up winning just by having more points by deducing more things than you, essentially. And so there's kind of an interesting difference there as well.
I'll have to check it out. Sounds interesting. I've heard of that, but I just figured, I got Cryptid, and it's good enough. I like Cryptid.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, how many deduction games do you need? But but I think this one isn't too expensive, and it was a lot of fun. So
yeah, I'm
definitely one I'd recommend for those interested.
I think my wife would say 0 is how many deduction games we need. So it's harder for me to get those to the table because they're not her favorite.
Yeah, they're kind of polarizing as a genre, but lots of fun with the right group.
Yeah.
What about you guys? What have you been excited to play soon or enjoying recently? Anything?
I just got my speaking of Kickstarter massive sets, I just got my my Street Fighter miniature game in, and oh my goodness, like it is the most beautiful game. Like I initially backed just as like a base pledge with one expansion, but then like the longer the campaign went on, I got kind of sucked into buying the rest of them. And these miniatures are so beautiful, and that was honestly what kept me like. I was like, I got to get the rest of these. Like, I may as well just get everything because they are. Have you guys seen them? Like, they're incredible.
I'm looking at it right now online. This is pretty intense. Actually,
I haven't seen it, really but good. I was barely born in the 80s, and the 80s kid that I am is like, I would go play some Street Fighter right now.
So
have you played it yet, or have you read the rules at least?
I've gone through some of the rules. I haven't played. I've only had it for about a week, and I went through and I sleeved the entire, like all 1,100 cards, and I organized it and set up all the 3D art pieces. But
did you say 1,100?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, this game is massive.
So have you guys ever played Star Wars Epic Duels?
That's the old version of Unmatched, right?
I don't know. I've never played Unmatched, but it's like basically you have characters and you move them, and you have a deck of cards dedicated to each character.
Yeah, That's
Yeah, you fight. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Restoration Games actually brought that back from the dead, I believe,
Okay.
as unmatched. And so yeah, and now they have it pitted like you can play Bruce Lee against Sherlock Holmes
Okay.
and the Jurassic Park Raptors against something else. Yeah, it's really cool. So it's kind of similar to that then?
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll see how it goes. You know, I'm excited to give it a try. They're supposed to, you know, hopefully if it does well enough, they'll release some Mortal Kombat as well with similar quality miniatures and stuff. But I'm not sure I'm ready to dive in for another $400. But I, you know, I've got to get a lot of play out of this one before I'm ready to throw down more money for more. So I don't have anywhere to put. I have all these miniatures in like this display case with their deck of cards underneath them. That's the only place I could find to fit everything.
Holy
So
smokes. These come fully colorized and everything?
Oh yeah, they're just incredible.
Yeah, these look really good. I've never heard of this board game just until you mentioned it now, and I'm familiar with Street Fighter. I've played the game before, but this is next level stuff. And so very cool. If you're a fan of Street Fighter or Unmatched, then this looks like it's going to be right up your alley for sure.
Yeah. So that, and I've got Anachrony that I've got that, and I'm trying to learn how to play that so I can teach that to my group.
Yeah, Anachrony, is that a worker placement game?
Yes. Yeah, and engine building, resource management. I think it's kind of a.
Is that the time traveling one?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so I've heard this can be compared a little bit to viticulture. Have you played that before?
I have not. No.
Okay. Yeah, I hear you can like send or collect resources from the future and have to pay them later, or or how does that work?
Oh,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, because Kyle's kind of been toying with some time travel like design ideas.
Yeah, I've really wanted to come up with a time travel game, and I've had some ideas, but just nothing that's quite been it yet. But that's a really interesting idea. I like that.
Yeah, I haven't tried Anachrony before. It's a 4.0 out of 5 complexity on Board Game Geek, so that would put it in like the medium heavy weights. And I usually, you know, I'm hesitant in that area because that's like a lot of rules investment, and you gotta love the game if you're putting that much time into learning it and trying to play it. At least for me personally, but it looks really cool. I've heard a lot of good things about it.
You know, speaking of time travel, it amazes me. I'm kind of getting off subject here a little bit, but I'm always amazed that there's never been a great Harry Potter game that's come out ever. Like, as popular as that IP is, like, how has there never been, you know, like the definitive? Like, you've got War of the Ring, you've got Star Wars Rebellion, you've got Batman games right now coming out every other month.
There are a ton of Batman games.
How is it that no one's made a great Harry Potter game yet? Like, there's so much to do, and I say that full well knowing that Hogwarts Battle exists, and it is the most watered down, poorly designed deck building game that is out there.
Shots fired. I haven't played it before. I don't know.
I haven't played it either. I was gonna say there's one I'd heard of, and that was it. But I haven't heard.
Yeah,
I haven't heard that. You're right. There's not a Harry Potter
with
game.
My wife, and it was just like, it was fun, but like it was nothing that we ever want to do again because it's just not a well-designed game.
Yeah, I imagine some kind of like almost like a Gloomhaven like game.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Would work well, where you kind of start out as a first year student and learn new spells as you go. And yeah, I wonder why that hasn't been made. Somebody's had plenty of years to design that. It'd definitely be more work than I'd want to take on as a designer, but that would be a cool game to see come to life.
I think part of it is just like the initial, like, people are probably afraid of like, you know, in order to do that, you have to have the rights, you know, which is a huge, so you only have a couple companies you can go to right now who have licensing rights to Harry Potter games. And so to design something specifically for an IP and then have that barrier being in your path, it's not very feasible, I think.
Yeah.
You have to have that perfect marriage of someone who already works at a company, you know, like Rob Davio, or somebody who like just excels at that type of a game. And, you know, I think it'll have to be the right person at the right place at the right time.
Totally. Yeah. I'm sure now that you've put that out into the universe, though, you know, it's going to enter somebody's brain and it'll happen, because that is definitely a, you know, gold mine waiting to be uncovered. How about you, Kyle? What have you been getting into recently or or thinking
I
about
feel a little
them?
bad. I was just looking at my app that I have that I keep track of board games I've played, and I honestly haven't been playing as much. A handful of different reasons. Some of it's I've been doing a lot of. I just got a, a Kickstarter preview game that I'm looking at, Oros, and I'm really excited for that one coming out. And that one's actually been a lot of fun to play different player counts and against different automas and things like that. So that one is one that I've enjoyed playing. I'm excited for it to come out on Kickstarter.
Yeah,
But
Oros looks cool, and you've mentioned this to me before. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about that and kind of what excites you about it?
yeah, so I'll be doing a full kind of a preview on my YouTube channel here coming up before too long. But it's just a really fascinating game. You're just creating, essentially you're creating mountains. You can move the map, or the board is a map, and you're just moving land tiles around, and you have actions you can take on your turn to either shift entire rows of land tiles, or you can collide lands together and form larger pieces of land and mountains. And on these mountains you can build sacred sites which awards you points. That's kind of what the game's about, is getting to a mountain and creating a mountain, and kind of the timing of some things there. But I think to me, it's a really fun game as far as like, you almost just feel powerful as you're like shifting land around and like smashing land together, creating bigger pieces of land and creating volcanoes that can spew out more land other places. So I think it's a pretty immersive, fun thing that way.
Yeah, I think this is the design that when I was trying to put some of my early designs onto board game contests and stuff, this one just kept plaguing all of them because it was winning like every design award. And it was
I
like,
told
haven't you won all the awards already? Like, isn't this thing, when is this thing going to get published? You're just making us all look
Seriously,
bad.
I think he's planning on this summer, July, I believe. But I've told him that. I said I'm so glad to go into Kickstarter with this so that someone else can have a chance to actually win a competition. But he's a phenomenal guy, like super nice guy. I really have enjoyed chatting with him and talked to him a few times. So I've been playing that game. Some of our own games here that we're designing in house at Bitewing Games. Been play testing those a handful of times and doing that, and we've really been enjoying those games. My wife and brother were like, "Oh, those games are really cool," and I really like, especially one of the games that we're coming out with. So
Soda Smugglers, right?
Soda
The spot
Smugglers
for 'em?
is the one that they're like, "Oh, that's a really fun game. I'm excited to get that in
Yes.
my hands." So those have been some of the games, and then just some basic, more of those medium or light games, Ethnos and Quacks of Quedlinburg. My family just got and has started to learn. So just a handful of an array of games that we've been playing.
Nice. Yeah, I'm looking at Oros right now. It's spelled Oros for those who might be interested. The art style is really cool. Sounds like a really solid design since it's been tested in the contest and climbed up the rankings of a bunch of those, and is finally getting polished enough that it's ready to be released. So for those of you guys interested, keep an eye on Kyle's YouTube channel. He does a great job with the videos, really high production quality, and he keeps them succinct. I do enjoy the long, in-depth videos that a lot of content creators put out, but sometimes it's nice to just sit down for a 6-minute review and get everything you need to out of a game. And Kyle does a really good job with keeping things succinct, but also really, I guess, engaging to watch. So when do you plan to put out that preview video?
I have to take the pictures and then edit it, so it's probably going to be another 3-4 weeks from right now, and we're filming, which is first part of April. So
Cool.
So probably May it'll come out.
Cool. Well, let's just end with one more question for each of us. And that is, what is the most recent game that you have purchased or backed on Kickstarter or pre-ordered, whatever you want to call it? It might take you a second to think. I have an embarrassing number of games on pre-order right now, but yeah, I've looked through all of them and just been like, man, I'm so pumped for all these games still. So that's a good sign. But for me, the most recent one I backed was, well, I think it was on the same day, actually. One is the Board Game Tables Kickstarter bundle. These games look freaking awesome. Bear Raid is one of them, Factory Funner, and Ghosts of Christmas is the bundle. And they don't really have anything in common, but Chad's just putting them out. I think his name's Chad.
Yeah.
He runs Board Game Tables. He's just putting them out together because that's his style. And one of them is designed by the designer of Pipeline, Ryan Courtney, and it just looks like a really fun stocks game. It kind of gives me a bit of the Estates vibe, honestly. If you're a fan of the Estates. It's a very mean auctioning game, but kind of lighthearted at the same time. That's what Bear Raid looks like. The other two look really cool as well. And on the same day, I backed John Company second edition because Cole Worley is one of my personal favorite designers. He does very deep games that require repeat plays to really get the most out of his games. But Root and Pax Pamir are two of my absolute favorite games. So I'm pumped about John Company, and it's a negotiation and manipulation game. And that's right in my wheelhouse. I love those kind of games. So I'm super pumped about that. All look fantastic. That is my most recent. I guess I cheated. I put 4 games out there, but it was on the same day. So what about you guys?
I recently backed, I think the most recent one was Cryptid Cafe. And interestingly enough, I just got off the phone with the designer of that game 10 minutes before we started this podcast. I chatted with him for a while about some distribution and pricing structure stuff as we're looking at doing our own Kickstarter here. And extremely nice guy, like super helpful and friendly. And I think that game looks just like a lot of fun. Your creatures, your cryptids there in a cafe, and you're trying to serve your customers. And for me, that was particularly interesting. My first game I designed was, not that it published or anything, but one that I designed was called Order Up, where you're servers at a restaurant trying to provide food to people. And that's essentially what the game is. And he kind of did what I dreamed of doing. And so that was an instant back for me. And like I said, super nice guy, super awesome, well-run campaign, and very, very pretty game. I'm excited to get that in however many months when it comes.
Yeah, that's funny. My very first game that I designed involved Sasquatch, and he was like the genesis of the idea. So the fact that our first 2 designs are kind of what he combined together, at least the themes, it's a very pretty cool looking game. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts on it when you do acquire a copy and see where that goes. How about you, Jacob?
So the one that I'm most excited about is actually the Shut Up and Sit Down game called what's it called?
Don't Get Got.
Don't Get Got. Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't know that is that Shut Up and Sit Down's game?
Yeah.
I didn't know it was.
They're heavily involved in it.
They're putting out their own version of it where they came up with all of the tasks or the challenges that you have to do.
Oh,
so
cool.
they teamed up with the designer publisher to put this out. I backed it too. So tell us why you're excited about this, because it's coming out soon, right?
Yeah. I think it seems like kind of one of those low key games. I think it seems like you kind of play it when you're in with a group, and you kind of try to. I mean, it's just something to do while you're doing other things, as from what I gather. And since I'm pretty involved with a lot of different types of groups, I think it might be kind of fun to introduce it to different. You can do it at work, or with youth groups, or even as part of like a game while we're playing other games. I'm kind of excited to see how we can incorporate that.
Yeah, this is a super cool party game. The Shut Up and Sit Down version doesn't even exist on Board Game Geek. Oddly enough, hopefully soon they'll add it. You can find it on their Kickstarter page, and maybe they have like a late pledge if you're interested. But yeah, it's cool because you hand out these task wallets to each player, and they have, I think, 3 tasks, unique tasks that everybody has to complete. They keep them secret. And basically you're just trying to trick somebody into doing something ridiculous, like, compliment your hair is an example they give, or hiding a card in a jar and getting another player to open it for you, like the actual card that you were given in the game, or making up a word and getting a player to ask what it means, just like really random stuff like that. And it's a meta game. You can play it, like you say, while you're playing your own game. I'm hoping to introduce this to my co-residents before our program's through. Hopefully we get it in time, because it sounds right up their alley.
Yeah. So that's one of them. Radlands by Roxley Games.
Ooh, I backed this too. All right.
Yeah.
Share some more.
One thing I found with Roxley is that like everything they put out is awesome. Like they did Brass Birmingham and Brass Lancashire. The Lancashire Steampunk Fusion Rally just arrived at my house. And so right now they're one of those companies that's like, anything they put out, I'm probably going to back it, unless it seems like there's no way I'm going to play this, because they do a great price point, and they're just a great company. And then I've always wanted to play Castles of Mad King Ludwig, so I went ahead and jumped in on the collector's edition.
Ooh, nice.
I didn't go for the Colossal Pledge, but I did go for the base. And then Stellaris Infinite Legacy, I'm currently backing it, but I may pull out. I'm not 100% sold on it, and it's a hefty price point. And so I've got like 3 more days to decide if I'm going to stay on the pledge or not. Not sure yet. Still looking into it.
Yeah, I only glanced at Stellaris, but it kind of reminded me of Eclipse Second Dawn for the Galaxy, which is one that I've been shouting from the rooftops. Great game.
That's an amazing game. Yeah, I love that game.
Good. Yeah, I don't know how similar they are. They probably aren't too similar, but is it like a 4X war game or
pseudo 4X? They kind of fudge on one of the X's, but yes,
close enough kind of thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and Radlands, yeah, I back that too. And Roxley puts out a ridiculous production with all their games. This one, they I actually owned like all their dice throwing stuff and recently realized like my tastes have changed, speaking of culling, and passed that on to somebody who would get more enjoyment out of it. But Radlands I broke down and backed because I follow Space Biff or Dan Thoreau. I would say he's the best board game writer / critic in the industry, because he always puts out very thoughtful and you can tell he thinks very carefully and deeply about the designs and the theme of the designs as well, and how they integrate well together. And he got an early copy of this and had a lot of good things to say about it, and so he kind of talked me into it, and I'm definitely excited for it as well. Nice. Well, anybody else have anything they'd like to share in this very special dentist podcast episode?
Probably going for your 6-month checkup if you haven't for a while. That'd be a good idea.
And I'll throw in, don't put your kids to bed with milk or juice. It's a really, really, really bad thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you a pro tip as well. So here we go. This one, I don't know, maybe I overshare it with patients, but when I heard this fact in dental school, I was like, why has nobody told me this? This is like such an easy way to avoid getting cavities and eating fillings. So when you brush your teeth with fluoride toothpaste, it's got to be fluoride. You spit it all out, but then don't rinse your mouth with water after that. Just leave the residue sitting on your teeth. They've done studies to show that this reduces cavities. It's so easy, and it's kind of weird at first because your mouth feels all funny and you want to rinse it with water. But if you get into a good habit of it, proof is in the pudding. You can avoid some cavities in the future, I would imagine. So there's our dental wisdom for you. Any others?
I think everyone's signed off already at this point.
Yeah,
they're tired
gone.
Of our lectures.
I'm gone. Yeah, we steered way off base in our podcast specialty topic here, and all of our fans are gone. Sorry about that, guys and ladies and gentlemen. So, well, Jacob, it's been a delight to have you. It was kind of a very funny thing, just like, hey, I'm a dentist and you guys are dentists, let's do a podcast episode. But it actually sounded like a lot of fun, and it was definitely worth doing. And I think we covered a lot of fun topics.
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Hopefully, maybe if we think of another topic, hopefully we have you back soon. And that the same goes for those of our listeners who also follow and listen along. If you feel like you have something interesting you'd like to chat about, we are not a dentist exclusive podcast, as I said in the beginning. We are Bite Wing Games. We obviously we're started by two dentists, but we are gamers first and foremost in this realm, and we love this hobby. And so if you want to come and chat with us, or even just leave us a comment on social media or on our website, you can do so. As we've shamelessly plugged during this podcast episode, we are coming out with a bundle of Kickstarter games, 2 of which from the prolific Reiner Knizia. And we aren't afraid of sharing our opinions on this podcast about any other games, and we try to do it, and we try to get better at doing it in a tactful and nice way, because we realize that we create games as well and everybody has feelings. But if you feel like you have similar opinions to us within this board gaming realm, I feel like you may really enjoy what we're planning on putting out in this bundle. And so you can follow along on the Bite Wing Games website by subscribing to the newsletter or just following us on social media. And we'll keep you updated with really cool artwork, especially coming soon from Paul Williams, our artist partner, who is currently working on Reiner's games, and is super excited about those developments. So we're expecting some concept art soon, and we will share it with our newsletter people first, and then on social media after that. So keep your eye out for it. And again, thank you guys for coming on here. This is always fun, a fun break. Most of the podcast episodes are by myself. It's so much easier to just chat with real people though, instead of reading a script. Spoilers, I don't just come up with it from the tip of my tongue, but thank you guys for both being here.
Thanks again.
Thank you.